The minor 2-5-1 is built off the same roots and has the same movement in fourths that a major 2-5-1 has, but it's arguably richer harmonically and a little more dramatic than its major counterpart. So what does this mean for your approaches to soloing over a minor 2-5-1? What ways of looking at it might you be missing out on? Well, this is episode 3 of my series, Making the Changes. We are looking at soloing over Blue Bossa, and at this point we have a minor 2-5-1 in C minor. The previous 2 episodes looked at the opening 4 bars and sort of things like call and response phrasing using arpeggios. To begin with, make sure you have a good ear for the progression itself, because the key to soloing is internalizing chord movements until the point where you find you don't have to think about them. This would mean then that you can recognize a 2-5-1 and minor 2-5-1 when you hear it, and you can hear it as a harmonic block, a journey to chord 1. 2 beginner-friendly ways to play this chord progression would be starting firstly on the E string, moving to the A to find our 5 chord, and then resolving to C minor 7 with the root on the E. Or you can start with the 2 on the A string, the 5 off the E, and then the 1 chord off the A string. Those are the ways I first started playing this progression, and I would suggest you want to be able to do that in any key. That's just a basic foundation to have. If you can do that for both the major and the minor 2-5-1 and other progressions like the 1-6-2-5, then you've just got chunks of harmony already just so easy to play, and it means you're playing less chord to chord and more playing blocks of harmony, which is a much smarter way to look at standards. Now, just to say, all of today's lesson resources are on Patreon on the lowest tier, the supporter tier. This will give you access to PDFs from season 2 of this series, PDFs from my YouTube videos, and all of my chord melodies. So for £2.50 you could get a lot of chord melodies. Link in the description. So that was a basic way to play it. I think we need to delve into why this progression works and see what's happening at the point of the chords changing. Let's start with what notes are to be found in those chords. In terms of the relationship and the connections between those chords, let's look at the 2 and the 5 first. Now, D minor 7 flat 5 and G7 actually share 2 notes in D and F. A flat goes down a semitone to G. And C goes down a semitone to B. Those are what we call the close resolves, and later we will try and find those in our arpeggios. Now the 5 to the 1, so G7 to C minor 7. G is a shared note between those 2 chords. B points up a semitone leading to the root of the C chord. D goes up a semitone to E flat. And F is sandwiched between E flat and G. And all of those movements and connections make that a real journey to that one chord. And I hear that progression as starting out from somewhere unstable on the 2 chord. The 5 chord then creates this feeling of going somewhere, and that somewhere is home, and that is the 1 chord where we resolve to. I think it's so important to think of it in terms like that rather than just from a theory point of view 2-5-1. It's no, what does that actually mean in terms of the movements and the feeling that those chord changes create. To really get into this progression further, it's very much worth appreciating that it comes in many forms. This is where all of the important listening comes in, because there are richer ways we could play this progression either from a soloing or comping perspective. And I think if you get an ear for the chords I'm about to show you, it will really open you up to more interesting sounds when you use solo and comp. Now essentially here we are talking about chord substitutions, where we replace the chord either with different chords altogether or variations of the original chord. And this will lead you to seeing and using the 2-5-1 as a basic template, which can be varied in many, many ways. We could sub out the 2 chord for an A flat major 7, what we call a flat 6 major chord, and go A flat major 7, G7 to C minor. And that works really well because there's a lot of shared notes there. Now D minor 7 flat 5 is also an inversion of F minor 6, so you can use any F minor 6 chord voicings that you know. You'll just be playing an inversion of, well, either chord. Now I think the character of the minor 2-5-1 is much moodier than the major equivalent, and it's more unstable to my ears. And that is often because the 5 chord is much more readily subbed out for more dissonant alterations. And this is where this progression very much becomes 2, 5, alt, 1 minor, and that alt means 5 plus alterations, and they could be to the 5th or the 9th or both. Take some of these options, alterations to the 9th. So if we went D minor 7 flat 5, G7 flat 9 to C minor 7. Instead of a flat 9, let's try G7 sharp 9. Alterations to the 5th also, so let's have G7 sharp 5. And then G7 flat 5. We could have different combinations of those, so here's an example with alterations to both, where we have G7 sharp 5 flat 9. Another common thing to do is replace the G7 with a diminished chord. Try D or B diminished 7. Now in those examples, these diminished chords are basically working like a rootless G7 flat 9. We could obviously also try a tritone sub and replace the G7 with its tritone D flat 7. And then other variations of that, like D flat 9 sharp 11. And our home chord could be richer too, maybe dissonant even. Try C minor 6. One of my favourites, C minor major 7. The melancholic C minor 9. I think this next one sounds quite expansive and open. C minor 11. And that's a lot of options. I would like now to piece together some of my favourite ways to play this progression now. A flat major 7, G7 sharp 5, C minor 9. D minor 7 flat 5, D diminished 7th, C minor 11. I love how the F stays on the top in that example. Minor 7 flat 5, G7 sharp 9 to flat 9 to C minor 6. Finally, D minor 7 flat 5, G7 sharp 9 to C minor major 7. Now those variations of the 2-5-1 had some nice close moves between the chords, and I really think that's where I personally find a lot of enjoyment in harmony. You can add tension and create wonderful movements that you just don't get with the basic versions of the chords that we looked at the top of this lesson. Now what you could do is you could take Blue Bossa or another song that features this progression and just play and expand the way you play the minor 2-5-1. The chart or iReal says D minor 7 flat 5 G7 C minor 7, and you start to play more interesting things chordally, which in turn will open your ear up to more interesting harmony for soloing. And I'll just leave one final point on comping. Try to voice lead rather than making big jumps. You want the changes to be smooth, especially when using dissonance. Now we move on to soloing now, but just to say, get an ear for those chords, and any of the arpeggios of those could work instead of the basic arpeggios. It's a way to make the changes in a more interesting way, which we will come to shortly. Now the simplest way to solo over the minor 2-5-1 to begin with would be a scale that would cover the majority of the harmony well. The best candidate being the C harmonic minor scale, a minor scale with a raised 7th, so it's got a major 7th. That major 7th gives you what we call a leading tone, a note, a semitone below the root of the scale, B to C. It also happens to be the major third of our 5 chords, so G7 in this key. So you could try having a go over the progression with that scale, but without consciously or subconsciously targeting some of the notes of the chords, it can just sound like a scale if we aren't careful. But it's one way you could navigate these changes, but try to create musical phrases rather than just running the scale up and down, although that might be necessary first to locate it and develop the technical foundation to be able to use it and improvise with it. You might also try the melodic minor on the 5 and the 1 chord. That sounds quite good. To begin with, just being able to make the changes through arpeggios, I think it's a key foundation from which to grow. It's learning to hear those chord tones as keynotes to build your phrases around when you're improvising. In the long run, you won't feel the need to use all of the notes of the arpeggios, but you'll feel drawn to them for building lines around. So my question to you is, can you play, to begin with, 1 octave arpeggios that follow the chords like this? And just remember with harmony, it's always about trying to think about, what if I try this, what if I do that, to expand how you use things and how you hear things and think about things. And doing something different with it to open up both your ear and your fretboard knowledge. Things like a pivot where you still play the arpeggio, but where you change the octave of a note or a couple notes. So in this next example, I still play 1, 3, 5, 7, but change the octave of the root to make it sound fresher. And next, can you connect to the nearest note so the arpeggios flow together? And what's happening here, as we discussed about earlier, how the chords kind of connect, what's the relationship between them, we're looking at that flat 7 to 3 move that happens when the chords move in fourths in the 2-5-1. We've got that flat 7 of D minor 7 flat 5 of C, moves down a semitone to a B, which is the third of G7. And then you've got the flat 7 of G7 and F that goes down a tone to the minor third of C minor, E flat. That is much better than playing the just 1 3 5 7, 1 3 5 7, 1 3 5 7. Now, if we think back to our ways we played the chords earlier, we are missing out on some of those rich extensions there. So let's play a little with arpeggio subs now. And you can either play an arpeggio substitution on its own and ignore the original arpeggio, or you can have a bitonal approach where you go between the two. So say you combined A flat major 7 and D minor 7 flat 5, and then you combine G7 and B flat 7, or G7 and D flat 7. Now all of those arpeggio subs are sounds to get into your ears and to really try and build phrases with. Now let's piece this 2-5-1 back into Blue Bossa, and we've come a long way since the beginning way of playing that progression at the top of the lesson. So the beginning 8 bars of Blue Bossa in terms of soloing, let's practice it like this. For your C minor 7 to F minor 7, 2 lines that feature call and response or repetition. We've got the same chord type there, so it makes it perfect for that kind of playing. For our minor 2-5-1, see it as an opportunity for a longer line that resolves on the one chord. This way of seeing songs in blocks of harmony makes it much easier to structure solos and move beyond arpeggios or scale choices to something musical and built around that key topic of phrasing. Here's some examples I've put together to show you that kind of approach to hopefully inspire you to do the same. So I've got a plan to structure my ideas on the opening line and the second line. Now, if you missed the previous series or the previous episodes in this series, I will put both playlists on the screen for you. And if you've enjoyed today's lesson, please do leave a comment. It really does just motivate me to make further content. Hit the like button and obviously comment with any questions that you might have. Please check out my Patreon, and that's linked in the description. And don't forget jazz guitar lessons with myself, Andy, every Monday. Until next time, you take care.